Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Daphne with yet another DIY video. I tried new things. I have this 60s style coffee table that we use as an entryway table. I looked it up and it's actually called a mid-century Scandinavian coffee table. I really like it, but what I did not like was the shade of it. It was too orange and too dark, and it was also a bit worn off and needed an upgrade anyway. And I wanted to make it a lighter shade. I definitely wanted to get rid of the redness, and through my research I found two techniques that are often used to lighten up dark furniture or dark wood, and these are to use bleach and to create a whitewash effect. And I tried both. I did a lot of research. I read about 10 to 15 blogs and I watched about 15 to 20 YouTube videos, and each and every one of them was following a different technique. And also half of the products recommended are not available where I live. So in the end, I was more confused. So I decided to mix and match everything I saw and read and do whatever I want. Now, before we get started, let me fast forward and say that I started restoring this table thinking it is solid wood. Halfway through the process, I realized it is not. It actually has a veneer top, and this can be seen from the edging, which is different to the surface of the table. I didn't know how to tell the difference between veneer and solid wood. Now I know. And even after Googling whether bleach would work on veneer, I got some results that said yes and some that said no. So I decided to try it out anyway. And I'll be honest, the end result is subtle, but the redness did go away, which to me was the most important. It is a little bit lighter, and all in all, it looks really nice in the space with the rest of the furniture and the lighting, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. So without further ado, let's get started. I always start any furniture makeover with cleaning. This time I am using sugar soap and a cloth to remove any dust and dirt, and this also helps me see if my piece is damaged. Luckily this one was in excellent condition, so I can now move on to the next step, which is stripping. So I used a paint and varnish remover to remove the stain, and here's my disclaimer: make sure to strip in a well-ventilated area and use protective equipment, because that stuff are carcinogenic, so gloves and a mask are a must. I would honestly not suggest this brand. I don't know, maybe I didn't use it properly, but it didn't really do much. So I followed the guidelines, which were to spread on a thin layer with a brush, leave it on for a couple of minutes, and then spread on a thicker layer. It didn't say how long I had to leave it on after the second layer, so I let it sit for 10 minutes, and by that time it had already pretty much dried down. Also, don't strip your furniture in the sun like I did, because as I said earlier, the sun made the stripper dry out pretty quickly and it wasn't easy to scrape off. I used a plastic spatula to scrape it off so I don't damage the table. It's also handy to have a small bucket or container to throw in the stripped leftovers. You could actually already see where the stripper had been activated the most, which is especially on the sides and the bottom. And once I was done removing the stripper, I took some white spirit and some fine steel wool and rubbed the whole table to wipe away any remaining stripper residue, and that's what it looked like after the white spirit. So because there was still some stain residue, I sanded the whole thing with a 120 grit sandpaper. Now with veneer, you have to be really careful when sanding because you may damage it and pierce through it. Luckily, I did not, at least I think I didn't. And then I sanded by hand those harder to reach areas, especially the corners and the little dowels under the surface. And then I went in with a 220 grit sandpaper for a small smooth finish. Mind you, at that point, I still hadn't realized this is veneer, and it was only after sanding that I was like, this doesn't look right. Where's the grain? So I looked it up and found that this is actually called straight grain veneer. And I finally used a 1 part white vinegar, 1 part water solution I mixed in an empty spray bottle to remove the dust with a cloth. And I found it interesting how every time I applied something liquid, the original color was coming through the surface. So to create my bleach mixture, I mixed 1 part bleach and 1 part water in a plastic container and applied it on the table with a brush. You could also use a spray bottle instead. It is as simple as it sounds. I really didn't know what to expect, and seeing the original color coming through was a little bit scary, but at that point there was no way back. I let it fully dry for a couple of hours, and this is what the first coat ended up looking like. I honestly couldn't tell the difference, so I decided to add a little bit more bleach on the next coat. And that was 2 parts bleach, 1 part water. And when that second coat dried, I still couldn't tell the difference. So I applied a 3rd coat. And again, when that dried, it looked pretty much the same. And then for the final coat, I applied just straight bleach, no water. I was experimenting by that point, I'm not gonna lie. And after the 4th coat, I was like, okay, this is clearly not making a ton of difference. I did see a little bit of whitening, but not like crazy much, so I thought, why not try whitewashing it? Also, it looked as if there were a few blotches here and there, and I thought that whitewashing might make it look a little bit more cohesive. So before whitewashing, I went ahead and sanded the table with a 120 grit sandpaper first, and that's when I was like, wait, did it work? Because I don't know if you guys can tell, but the sanded area looks a lot more lighter than the non-sanded area on the right. So that was a pleasant surprise. Maybe it worked after all. And then I also used a 220 grit sandpaper to smooth it out. And finally, I used the same vinegar and water solution to clean it. And now I am ready to whitewash. So this is one of those unfortunate times that my camera died and didn't save the clip. So that's what the surface looks like whitewashed. And to create the mixture, I added 2 parts water and 1 part white acrylic paint so that it ended up having a watery consistency. You can actually tell the difference between the whitewashed top and the natural bottom. So to create this whitewashed effect, I applied the mixture with a brush, let it sit for 3 minutes, and then wiped it clean with a clean cloth. Actually, when I whitewashed the surface, I had mixed feelings, but I asked you guys over on IG which part you liked the most, and the majority voted for the top, so I continued on, and I'm actually very happy I did because I ended up really liking the final result. Now, if you've seen my previous videos, you already know that I tend to not seal my wooden pieces because I really like this rough organic texture, but with this one I decided to seal it because it will probably get a lot of use, and of course I decided to go in with a matte polyurethane sealer, which was actually the first time I used it. And one thing I learned is to use a natural bristle brush with oil-based varnishes and a synthetic bristle brush with water-based ones, so you don't get any bubbles when applying it. So I applied the first layer and saw that it had slightly darkened the table. Perhaps if I knew that that would be the reaction of the poly top coat, I would have used a 1-to-1 ratio of water and white paint for the whitewash, or I would have let it sit a couple of minutes longer. But I was being very cautious during this project because it was the first time I did it, and all in all, it was a fun experiment. I ended up really liking the final result. So a few hours later, when that first poly coat had dried, I sanded the table with a 220 grit sandpaper, wiped it clean, and applied a second coat of poly. Okay, I'm gonna let it fully dry and then I'm going to apply a third layer because that's what's recommended by the brand. So why don't we just skip to the final reveal in 3, 2, 1. And that, you guys, was how I restored and refinished this old coffee table and lightened it up a bit. The camera actually doesn't pick up the right shade. It looks a little bit more faded in real life, which I love. I actually ended up liking the final result a lot, and I learned a lot of new things during this process, which I always enjoy, like how to create this whitewash effect, how to tell solid wood from veneer, which can definitely be useful in the future. I do feel like what made most of the difference on this table was the whitewash effect rather than the bleach. So I will definitely try out bleaching solid wood in the future just to see if there's any difference. I expect there is, but if you are just as curious as me, make sure you are subscribed and you have the notifications turned on. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!